Shout out to all of you for coming out in this rain. Really
For
appreciate
real.
that. The title of this exhibition, Swarm, as many people know, refers to the community of artists and cultural workers that you were surrounded by in Brooklyn in the mid-2000s. And you've talked a lot about how there are other swarms in other cities. And I wanted to ask you specifically for yourself, what about this time was so formative for you? And how did you settle on the name Swarm versus another collective noun, like flock or, something else?
When you say this time, you mean the time?
That time,
Oh,
yeah. The early 2000s or mid 2000s.
I think at that time, I was in college essentially, or, just coming out of the college moment, which I think is the first time that you're really choosing who to be around, or you get an illusion of the choice of like who to be around and why you would sort of interact with any specific community. And I think in understanding, maybe like a year into that process, I started to understand that there's just societal factors at play that choose that for you more than I would have understood beforehand, like when just trying to make friends, in New York at that time. And the kind of attempt to make sense out of that moment, like the fact that, I'm only in these particular rooms because of what I decided to do with my life. And these other people are here because they decided a similar thing. And we're having these types of conversations because of the things that are happening to us or happen to our families that set us up to be at this particular college at this particular moment, or this particular grad school, this particular art show, or whatever it is, or film festival. And I think it was just like, yet another moment of trying to understand the macro forces of society and how they act upon us, so that some level of intention could be brought to like my own actions. And the reason I started, the term swarm was one of, I think, 4 terms that James and I most specifically would talk about a lot. So swarm, there was Swarm, which we consider ourselves a part of, which was actually a subset of Buppies, which we understood is, you know what a Buppy is. Y'all know what that is, or was. I don't think people use that term anymore, but nah. Y'all know what Buppies are? Y'all know what a yuppie is? It's a black yuppie. But, just people who imagine themselves as a part
Nelson
of...
George coined that, I think, right?
Yuppies or Buppies?
Buppy. Or was one of the first. But anyway, sorry.
No. I'm not sure. But just, the kind of black middle class that was happening for millennials, essentially, it creates a reality where, those of us who, because of that middle class mobility, moved from the cities that we were born in that case, New York, but any city, that was kind of one of the bigger differences between a Buppy and somebody who is in the swarm, because there's a certain level of like engagement with the city itself that comes when you're from there. And, another demographic marker we used to say was like industry, which is like people who were really intent on breaking into the music or film industry. And we noticed most of those people lived in Manhattan or Harlem. And I think the other one was borough, which is like people who worked, like who went to John Jay and like worked high level security jobs or worked in radiology at the hospital and, like made the infrastructure of the city run. So it was like thinking of ourselves as in this set of demographics. And the big thing that I always felt was important that wasn't happening was conversation and interaction across those demographics. And that's why I say like it became a term to try and figure out, well, because at that time we were doing Solo Brooklyn Festival also, so we were just thinking about things like how do we get these types of people here, like, or the garden part of the Weeksville was right across from the projects, the Weeksville projects, and there were, Sean and I and Lisa would talk about like, okay, how do we get the people from the projects to come over to, it was like a constant question of how do we build coalition, essentially, because knowing that that's how we get to liberation is so we could really be talking to each other across experiences, across sets of experiences.
I just want to quickly add that's James Bartlett, Sean
okay.
Peters, and Elisa Blunt Moorhead. Yeah.
Yes.
All of whom appear in the catalog.
Yes. And so I would say that the use of the term was designed to notice something about what was at play, what separation was at play, so that we could break it down and not be separate. And I don't think we succeeded on any level past trying things, you know, especially trying programming, trying, you know, art programming, you know, through Mokata at that time, through Weeksville, to try and bring those different communities together and seeing what worked and what didn't work, you know.
Thank you. Why is working in community of value to you? It's something you talk about a lot. But why is that an important value? Where'd you learn that?
My parents, you know, my grandparents, and on back, you know, my mother is an organizer, an art teacher, acting coach, director. And she, when I was younger, her and a lot of the artists in Dallas had a organization, not unlike BlackStar Projects, that would, you know, for instance, when Killer Sheep or Daughters of the Dust came through town, they would organize the screening and get the churches out, you know. So all my first experiences, this is only something I know like in 2020 hindsight, where I was interacting with the, you know, kind of foundational texts of Black cinema, for instance, happened because some people got together in a room and decided it had to happen, you know what I mean? And I don't think that I have even now like a conscious mind drive towards being in community other than just what I was taught, you know, as a child, as a very young child, even before I was born, you know, like that was their practice, and that was their practice because that was their parents' practice, you know? And, you know, it's just all survival, you know, and trying to create ties that bind so that, you know, when scarcity happens, when survival mode happens, you know, we have each other to lean on, and, you know, it comes up whenever, you know, especially as Black people in this country, you know, we're constantly under different types of threat, you know, both immediate and seemingly far off. But I think that in the dynamic of like how community or really orienting myself and my practice towards that comes up, I think it's more that I try and presence it in the story as opposed to it's happening any more or less than it's happening for any artist. Because it, you know, ain't nobody doing nothing alone. You know what I mean? Nothing happens alone. So, especially with film or, you know, kind of installation work on with this level of ambition, you know, it takes you coming to me and being like, let's do this. Let's reimagine these things this way, you know? And I think all those, the films in the show, you know, evidence a very large community of people who we're doing it just to do it, you know, just to be together, you know, on some level. Yeah. So I think it's that. It's telling the story of how things got made.
Yeah. What role do you want for the audience to play in seeing the exhibition? There are ways in which you're kind of blurring the lines between the swarm that you described, but there's also a way in which I think museum guests are being invited to be in the swarm, in the immersiveness of these installations. So is that, I know it's intentional, but can you talk about why you've made these kind of invitations to play?
That's interesting, because when I used to use the term, I never used to use it aspirationally initially. It was a little self-deprecating. And I remember one of the sort of criteria for being in the swarm was all people in the swarm would deny that they are within the swarm, because it's just like some affect to cast off labels or something like that. So I think there's like a tongue-in-cheek aspect to it, but kind of as I've, you know, understood it in how it's been sort of incorporated into this show, or as evidence of a people, I've just started to think about that, like oriented towards that possibility that, that a people, are kind of constantly imagining a set of practices together that hopefully in this context, like, are sort of patterned in what we call artwork, you know what I mean? And, the thing that's sort of patterned in some of the things, or that maybe is, is most patterned in random acts, but like everything leading up to that is how to interact with the elements in a way that, uses ritual as a framework, and how nonverbal that is as a way of being or as a practice. And so I think that the invitation of, some of how the work is organized and how people can be together with it is just trying to lean it towards that possibility, towards like seeing people doing certain types of ritual without like having a book about it. Like, this is what you're supposed to do or not supposed to do. It's a little more, open-ended, and how people can see the possibility of being in ritual space or ritual vibe with other people, and I kind of felt that at the opening, but just even kind of walking through people, seeing people, how people are with that particular space, yeah, I hope that this is just like the first attempt at that. I wonder where that will go,
Yeah. This is your first solo exhibition, and you're working on a different and maybe even larger scale than previous exhibition experiences. What were some of the challenges that you encountered when figuring out how to translate some of your ideas in some of these older works? There are 2 pre-existing works that we reimagined, and then there are 2 new works. And so when translating them to scale, what were some of the challenges besides money?
Besides money. I think I'm generally I don't really look back at stuff. Like, I don't enjoy that or like do it, So it was hard to just realize that I had to do that as a point of fact. And I would say it was a challenge, but I think that the gift of the process was to work with Aiden, work with Ronnie, work with Amani, who's here. I don't know if Aiden and Ronnie are here, but
that would be Aiden Unn and Ronnie Nicole Henderson Day.
Yeah, who are the editors, respectively, who worked on Swimming in Your Skin Again and Univi Telan in this iteration. And I think that the time it's been since those were finished in their previous versions, allow for a certain level of like, have at it, do what you're gonna do, where I could be in a little bit more of a response mode to how they felt about those in the present. And so I think where there would have been a challenge, where I expected a challenge, because that kind of happened a little later. It happened sort of secondary to the space imagining part of it. And I think because the space imagining part of it was more or less worked out before the reimagining the cinema of it all, it was a really free-flowing process. And I think also just like the rules, you know what I mean? Like I was trying to have like live plants in there and all kinds of other random stuff that you're just not allowed to do, you know what I mean? Because I guess there's some bacteria on the plants.
Pests.
Something like that. Pests.
Yeah.
There's
Live.
pests. But we inside now. What about this?
We are outside.
This right here.
And that's not the gallery.
I bet.
That is insured.
Raise show of hands. Who thinks we're inside? I think we're inside by way of walls and ceiling. Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Terrence does not like following the rules. That is absolutely true. Um,
I love a rule.
can you talk about what some of your artistic influences were when you were thinking about what this exhibition could be? Were there any text or any music or anything that sort of like immediately came to mind as you started to imagine what might be included?
Well, I think a few things were happening at the time. Um, Specifically, Random Act Season 2 was happening. And we were also working on a project that's still in development called Fourth Dimension Trigger, Fifth Dimension Trauma, which was going to be possibly a part of this at the time. And a few other things that were in the mix to be a part of this until a week before we finished. So I think that those pieces, were really about just me asking myself, can like the whole art practice thing be ritual? Most specifically to bring in Maldoma's teaching again, interacting with the elements that are available to us in order to facilitate a spontaneous interaction with the spirit world or spiritual beings. And, he really emphasizes spontaneous interaction. And in that imagining, I think that it's me kind of trying to remedy something that's inherently a part of the process of filmmaking, especially in the industrial process of filmmaking, which is, pulling out as much spontaneity as possible so that it can, can fit into a resource box. People can know what's going to happen and feel super safe, in all ways. And, not that there are other sort of things to try and depart from, but I think that's one of the main ones in attempting to imagine my own practice as ritual and not assuming that it's there because people say that word a lot, like, and I was actually reading this book about habits, and they talk about like making little rituals, like before you write, take 3 breaths and close your eyes and knock on the table so that's your writing ritual, so you're ready. And that's the opposite of what Maldoma says, because he would define that as a routine, because it's the same every time, and it sort of understands the elements as static, and they're not, and so I was trying to really understand how a process that just has dates that things have to happen by, deadlines and all this stuff that you got to do can facilitate those spontaneous interactions, and then how they could be described, which they can't be, they can only be experienced and felt in a way. And so, obviously Maldoma's texts came up a lot in that process. It still do. I think at that time, I was also studying certain films that were kind of like made in the revolutionary moment in West Africa. I think specifically Yaleen, just cinema that attempted to visualize ritual and, Black spiritual practices that saw themselves and understand themselves as, existing before any kind of, Western, Abrahamic, colonial, religious interaction, and how attempting to photograph that stuff, or like make it into a story in any kind of way is just difficult, or is a lot. There hasn't been a lot that's been worked out in that space. So I think that because of just what we're showing what we were doing at Random Acts in the second season. Those things were kind of coming up as texts.
In the catalog, you include an excerpt from Kathleen Collins' masterclass at Howard in, I think, 1982. There's no exact relationship to the show, but why was it important for you for it to be in the catalog? And like, what can people who are experiencing the exhibition, what's the relationship between those two? You can also watch this on Vimeo. Highly recommend it.
Highly recommend it. It's essential. It's an essential text. I think, I'm acknowledging that community of filmmakers who are, my elders. I don't really know if this is true, but somebody who watched the video, who I believe was in the room, said Hilarie was actually the one operating the camera.
He was.
You said that?
Yeah. No, I didn't say that, but I confirmed with Montre. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that it's evidence of so many just beautiful and necessary operations of, cinema and Black cinema as a evolving technology that's being transferred in that moment. It's a class. And I think that essentially some part of what all this is, all of what all this is descended from those lessons, period, and then it's attempting to add its own lessons to those lessons, and I think that ultimately I wanted the catalog and the show itself to have a utility of transference of that knowledge. And there's certain things that she says about, I'm going to misquote it, but she talks about like the extremity with which most representations, especially cinematic representations of Black people, operate within. I think there's a line from a BlackStar song. I think Yassine Bey says it. It's like, I find it distressing. There's never no in between. We're either niggas or kings. We either bitches or queens. Mm-hmm. And she says that basically, that we are mostly characterized in these extremes, and there's never an in between. And everyone she knows, essentially, and everything that she's trying to imagine is this in between. And you can see that in her films, in her plays, in her stories, is this imagination of all these in between characterizations that, come from what it is actually like to experience cinema that speaks to life, that speaks or testifies or witnesses what some version of what life is, and so I think that the way I end up interpreting that is a little bit maybe imagining not even characters, but some channels, no pun intended, who are inhabited constantly by all kinds of in-between beings, essentially. And I think I was really, I don't even know if, everyone should definitely listen to the entire class, but that one piece spoke to me among other pieces as like what I'm up to, essentially,
Thank you. Until just now, I had not thought about the double entendre of channel with this project in television with From the Void. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. I hope I don't run out of time. But I did want to ask you about television and how why television as a medium, and what are you interested in exploring with that in a contemporary art space? Because you've specifically talked about television, not film, with From the Void as a tool.
It's a family business, My dad is a news photographer growing up. So he was growing up, you get up 3:00 in the morning, get in his truck. We call it the news unit, which is a cool name for a truck. You go out, shoot the stories, edit them. They'd be on the news by 4:00, and it was every day. So I think it was just, I took it for granted, but it's like, I just grew up with somebody who's putting something on TV every day. And I didn't go with him a lot, but then when I would, it was you ever seen that movie, with Jake Gyllenhaal where he's like chasing ambulances with a camera. It had that vibe to it. You know what I'm saying? I mean, a little bit. You know, this is like pre-Google Maps too. You had the Mapsco book. Remember the Mapsco? Any old folks in here? Mapsco is like an atlas that you got to use as your Google Maps. It's this big. You got to learn, you know, cartography or whatever the art of reading maps is. And so, you know, I'm sitting next to her like, all right, how do I get to 635 in Central and whatever is this? But yeah, it's family business in that way. And then my mother was a actress and PA on the Ozzy and Ruby show, which was a variety show in Dallas that Ozzy Davis and Ruby D did in different municipalities. They did it in DC also, I think, for a few seasons. This is all before I was born, but you know, in 2020 hindsight, I think TV was just because it was happening, you know. And PBS at the time felt like it was just happening down the street to me. You know what I mean? Like Barney was shot in Dallas, I remember. And I don't know, just knowing that as a kid, you were like, oh, that's just you know, they do it there and then it's there. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Yeah, so I think it's as simple as that in a certain way. And then I think that there is a part of my own, the desire of my consciousness to figure out how to shift my own consciousness through the things that I receive in my eyes and ears. And I can see the way that, you know, we talked about this in the season 2 writers room a lot, which is like a Hippocratic oath for filmmakers. And I would say most specifically TV makers, because the Hippocratic oath, to my knowledge, I think like lawyers and doctors have to take it. It's basically, I have these skills as a doctor where I could, you know, do a lot of stuff to the human body because of my knowledge of it, but I'm going to do no harm. You know what I mean? And I feel like as filmmakers, we have that scalpel in our hand in a certain way, with television especially, because of how it transmits itself into our consciousness and the type of behavior changes it can elicit. But we take no such oath. You know what I mean? Like, in fact, the expectation is that you shock people sometimes, or, you know, really go at their nervous system. That's what's considered entertaining. And I think that we do have you know, the FCC has all these laws and rules about what you can put on TV and what you can't, because there's this explicit understanding that you can watch something that will harm you, or you can watch something that will help you or inform you. And so there's this a big tension between this concept of like artistic freedom and responsibility with the actual utility or power of the medium itself. And I say all that to say that, like, television, because it's in your house and on your phone, in your hip pocket at all times, especially now, especially for the next generation, becomes the tool with which shifting consciousness is most possible. And it can get shifted in any way, you know? And so I'm trying to be in the game, you know? I'm trying to like have an effect and a utility and usefulness with what I do, because this was the gift I was given, you know?
I was given the signal, so I wanted to get into asking you about each installation. I won't be able to do that, but I want to start with the opening one before we open to the audience. And our beloved Meg Only, who curated the Carolyn Lazard show, referred to Bell Hook's notion of the living room as the first site of curation for many Black people. And it occurred to me that when we walk into your exhibition, we're in that Black living room. And I just wanted to ask you about, you know, a lot of people are familiar with Chosen Family or Jesus or Martin Luther King being on the walls, right? Like, this is sites of art, but also through TV screens, right? Like, the living room is this place of all these things being curated. So what made you want to recreate a living room as the opening space?
You know what I just realized when you said that? I grew up in a Christian household. We don't got no Jesus anywhere, which is interesting in terms of what has transpired, you know, after that moment of being raised there. But I think that the Bradford, who's a brother of mine, and Bradford Young, and a collaborator, he often says that, he asks young filmmakers also to consider how their, the sites and the rooms that they grew up in were lit when cultivating their voice, And I think the decision there is a literal nod to that, to, just give people the source point in a very literal didactic way. Because I think that, what actually happens in that source point is sometimes revelatory for people. The first place I saw 2001: Space Odyssey was in my living room, or, Days of Heaven, or, just giants of cinema were not at the movie theater. They were in my living room. I think they were at the movie theater because my dad's first experiences at the movie theater were in segregation, and he has extremely intensely violent experiences with attempting to go to the movie theaters as a kid. So we didn't go that much. I don't know that, but I know those two things exist. So he was interested in cinema though. So he brought that home. We watched it on VHS, And I think that, the storytelling of that moment is in the decision to orient the offering that I'm, channeling through in a place that feels that way, with his mother on the wall and with my mother's mother on the wall, because that's what it was. That's what it is, And just like with photos that he took, of them. So this is specific to the energetic that comes through when we capture each other in that way,
Thank you. Also want to shout out to Nora Mendez, who the brilliant production designer who found you that white couch. So let's open up to the audience. And Rachel, should I just call on people?
If you have a question, raise your hand. I will come to you with the mic. And maybe if I can't see them, just point them out. Yep, I see you right over here.
Good evening.
Hello.
So I got a question about your mythology. Like the mythology, it sounds like, with your work running all throughout it, this narrative of the swarm, right? That is in this exhibition. I was wondering how you identify with that archetype, because in my experience, and maybe some of yours, when I think of swarms of killer bees, swarms of zombies. And of course, the resonant idea of the swarm has come through this other program that was on, I guess, Amazon, like the horror thing that maybe, right? So just this idea of destruction and death, right, with the swarm that can happen in nature, Have you kind of had a positive swing to it, or what was your intention with the swarm in terms of how you identify with it in your own narrative? Is it positive, negative, protagonist, antagonist, anti-hero? How do you identify with that?
It wasn't really in any of those paradigms, because at the time, I think I was thinking about bees and honey and bees are great. They make the world go round. So
good things.
You need them to pollinate everything. If they go away, apocalypse, a world collapse. Nothing's working without this disindividuated being. And I think I was also thinking about disindividuation as a dynamic, because of at that time I was asking myself, is the animal the whole swarm of bees or just one bee? You know what I mean? I was asking myself that, just right,
the swarm mentality, even in science fiction with the swarm of sentinels in the Matrix, right?
Exactly.
And I even have a personal experience with a swarm of ants in the Amazon, which wasn't positive at all. And so I just think, so I'm just wondering, no, true story. That's why for me, the idea of swarms and infestation is something with decay. And like you said, it's apocalyptic, right? So,
no. I didn't say it was apocalyptic.
In my point of view.
I said if they go away.
Oh, if they go away.
it
So
will be
your
a
swarm is
bad
positive, is what I'm getting.
1,000% positive.
Okay, good. That's all.
I
I
was-
was for double checking.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
like, I just wanted it to be clear because it's like, I do think that the the smaller entities, move together necessarily, and they listen together, and that's what I was thinking about. It's just all the other elements that they listen to in order to make decisions, which are inherently together, and not what one ant wants to do, which might not be helpful sometimes,
And just one real quick thing is about the vortex too, like in the same way. Like sometimes a vortex can be like an abyss and like a black hole in a bad place,
Are you a Scorpio? No.
Aquarius, come on now, man.
I know. That was for the joke. I know your sign.
Right, like you know that. But then the other thing, it could be a portal to a positive place. So just wondering how you feel about the vortex and what that means in your like whole lexicon of things.
Yeah, I thought of it as not amoral, I would say, like not good or bad, just the reality of, or a description of how life moves, which is that it's always spinning, just a constant motion around a center. And I had this image of most vortexes having a calm center, like there's always a center moment that's calm, but you can't stay there. You have to keep moving to the other side, and it's going to feel like everything's moving one way. Then you cross the center again, it's going to feel like everything's moving the other way. And I always felt like the challenge of life is to maintain balance. Yeah. But moving too, you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Yeah.
Hi, Terence.
Hello.
All right. So, my name is Ebony. Hi, everybody. Hi. So my question is, can you tell us more about the Lalibela that's in Baltimore? What is the mission for it, and what inspired you to bring it to Baltimore?
Yes, I can. Lalibela is a collective Maori and I are both a part of, and we are endeavoring to create a site for cinema and all kinds of other disciplines for, the possibility of liberated conditions. Because in my experience, most of the nature of making cinema and many other things is highly controlled by the means of production and the fact that the means of production happens somewhere else, in a place that you have to pay to be at, and our intervention and our understanding is like that all the micro interactions that come when we're together, when we're physically around each other, are the reason we're doing it. The reason we're crafting the medicine of cinema and sharing it is to foster that togetherness, that swarm energy. And you can't do that unless there's a place where the energy is attuned towards that intention, and most other places you go just aren't by their nature, and so that's the initiation of like the why of it. And we all Mary does not live in Baltimore, as you can see, but most of us do, and I think that you live in Baltimore also. So I think it was necessary, and it is necessary, that we are crafting the space with the people of the city and with the city itself as a site where that kind of community can gestate from the ground up, and it's not like coming from some sort of, I guess, project-led idea, like is this film or that thing. It's more about what tending to the space itself and the people there will actually bear out in terms of capacity, and energy and intention. So that's why Baltimore. No problem.
Hello, I have the mic now. I'm right here. I'm behind Ebony. Hi, everyone. My name is Regia. I'm also from Baltimore. And I have two questions, because the first one you might answer quickly and kind of already did, but I kind of always like to explore this. How do you define environment, and would you consider your work environmental? And then I have a second question.
Oh, okay. Answer that one first. How do I define environment? It's just wherever you at, you know what I mean? The space, wherever you are. And I would say what I would define my work as environmental. I think that this is like one of the first attempts in the work I'm doing with Umakroma. We created a ritual space in Rotterdam, Baltimore's sister city, that was imagining a space for ritual to prey on raising free Black children. And so with that piece, which is called God Thyself, and with Swarm, I think those are, me attempting to start to build a practice of creating environments that have a utility, So I'm just getting into that, but I would definitely say yes.
Great. And my second question is, you talked a little bit about balance. So my question is, how do you balance the need to push boundaries with the need to create something resonant and accessible to the audience?
I'm triggered by that question. My initial reaction, my trigger response was boundaries. Nah, I don't know where they at. Like, I don't know. I feel like that there is a concept of what I'm doing, or what the ideas that I have, as that I think of them as strange, which I can kind of understand maybe when I'm like looking at it from like sometimes when you're like half asleep, you can imagine yourself as not who you are. You can like see something and like, oh, that's how people see it. That's crazy, But generally, I'm kind of like, this is really normal, guys. Like, this is super normal. Like, everything I'm doing is, to me, extremely, the second thing you said, like, legible. Is that what you said? Accessible. And so I think that,
Random Act Season 2 to you is accessible. That's what you're saying? I'm asking for clarity. I'm just asking.
Let's let the people decide.
But I mean, that's your intent, that it is accessible.
Obviously. Why? Okay. Let me ask you a question. Why would anyone make anything that is inaccessible ever?
Well, maybe you don't think about it.
No, you think about, like, if I'm having a conversation with somebody, say I'm triggered, I'm sorry. If I'm having a conversation with somebody, I want them to understand the words that I'm saying, and I want to understand the words they're saying. I think what is happening is, on some level, I'm realizing I was kind of raised in a different country or something. So when I'm talking, I think everybody was raised with speaking the language I'm speaking, but I guess not. You know what I mean? It is some people who because some people will say things like, oh, they understood what I was saying, but all these other people didn't. And it's hard because some of the slang from our country is extremely popular everywhere, if I'm extending this metaphor. So I constantly feel like, to your point, it's all quote unquote accessible. So when it isn't accessible, or when that calculation is supposed to be happening, I'm never making the calculation. Also because of my maybe inaccurate read of other work that to me is explicitly abstract, that is out in the world. You know what I mean? That I, can understand myself in conversation with, but not as abstract. I'm not as abstract as that, for instance, that kind of like way of placing myself, So I think it's an open question. But I don't think that, I think of it as balance. I think of it as trying to speak, listen to those around me. And mostly I think you get in that kind of, in the writer's room, for instance, we start talking a language that comes from all these readings we did. And then we realized nobody else read those books. You know what I mean? But then it's like, you end up realizing that the most important thing is to not personalize it. Terence is not making it. You know what I mean? it's just being channeled through. So I also can't attribute it what it ends up being too much to some calculation that I can make on Earth in that way. I just have to have faith that it's doing what it needs to do, you know, and whatever that is what it is, you know. No apologies. It's all good. We love that. That's what the show's about.
Hi, Terence. Anito here.
Oh, what's up?
Hey, I'm actually from the Philippines, but I actually lived in Dallas for a while. I danced for Dallas Black Dance Theater and lived in Oak Cliff, South Side and Lamar. I don't know if those are familiar to you.
Very.
So it's like full circle. So I actually was in grad school. I was kind of really like, especially since I couldn't afford subscriptions at that time. So I was going through your website and watching like every film in there. I was fascinated with like oversimplification and 18-year-old boys and girls. I think you allowed me as a dancer who's trying to get into film or incorporate film into my dance practice to like archive process, because it seemed like that's what you were doing. Just trying to let you know that I applied it into my own identity as a Filipino American mother, and like, okay, Malaya, we're gonna go through Google and screen record all what you can see about like what is a Filipino woman, and then all of the things that popped up were like, you know, mail to order brides, like things like that. So that was kind of similar, like that your 18-year-old boys and girls like really like prompted one of my grad school projects actually. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And I'm curious because it seems, and I assume because this is how I am as a dancer, that I create, and then I edit and put later. Because I've worked with filmmakers who like have like a shot list, and it's pretty like specific from the get-go. And I feel like when I watch your work, I'm like, I can identify with this because as a dance maker, I just create, throw things I don't need, just accumulate. So I'm assuming that's your practice. And I do have a second question about like spirituality and how do you navigate like being like sometimes I find it difficult to sometimes it's so ephemeral that I feel like when I'm in a place of spirit that I don't want to record. Like, you know, like for example, I was just in Haley. I was just in Puerto Rico. I was in La Perla, and we were dancing bomba, and like I wanted to bring out the camera, but then I said, no. Or how do I even like stage this? Like, how do you navigate like staging spirit, things like that? So there's two questions there. Thank you.
Great questions. Thank you for that reflection on 18 Black girls ages 1 to 18 who have arrived at the singularity and are thus spiritual machines. That was a really cool example of like just how behavior can be shared. And to your first question, I'm sorry, I got caught up in the second question. So now
the first question was about I think what I heard her ask was if you have a prepared shot list, or do you throw things and then edit later?
No, it's definitely highly prepared, and not so much in a shot list way, which yes, but I think more of the script is extremely descriptive, and you know, we have very limited resources. So the level of precision that has to go into what we're going to shoot with the time we have is extremely high. There's not a lot on the cutting room floor. And I think that that's just a condition of the way I've had to make things most recently, or really mostly, you know, over the course of, you know, the time I've been making things. And to the second question is, I like that phrase, staging spirit. I think that it's a conundrum, you know, it's just one of those collisions of, you know, modern culture and indigenous cultures, which is like the way that art and creativity functions as an energy is mostly in modern culture a spectacle, a stage even, whereas I think mostly the transaction of the stage and the audience is a kind of like strange, illegible division of labor in a ritual context where everybody got to contribute. Like, if you're not contributing, then you need to leave. You know what I mean? Like, what's the issue? Like, and I feel like that there's the camera itself as a sentient being becomes a participant or not. And that's hard to like set a hard rule on. It's a very situational decision, as you kind of narrated it, like you sense into it whether the camera can be there as a participant. But I think, yeah, it's just one of those things that I feel like, in a ritual context, you sense into the guidance that comes from other realms, and it's different for everybody, that guides you into what decision to make, and it is the right answer is always right for that moment, and then in the next moment it's another moment, so that's how I approach it.
So I just want to say we have time for a couple more questions, and I've got them lined up. But fear not, we will be selling books downstairs. You can mix, you can mingle, you can talk with each other. But yes, these will be our last two questions.
I like the level of excitement that's in here right now.
Hello, hi.
Hi.
So you talked about rules and kind of being rules defiant, and I was thinking about, when you talked about your artistic freedom and utility, and the storying of kind of sub-channels and in-between extremities, like how do you maintain and preserve the integrity of your kind of like practice as ritual and the people that you're with in ritual with, and with the earth and everything that you embody in your practice? How do you maintain the integrity of that within kind of these containers and enclosures and like institutions like HBO and culture institutions like the ICA? Like how do you make sense of kind of like your expressioning and your utility in terms of within these containers and enclosures? That's my question.
I would say, one, I'm not in it alone. In anything I'm doing, I'm with other people who I make decisions with, Maori's here, Amani's here. They're two of the people I make a lot of decisions with. But it's even larger than that. And I think that the main antagonism to feeling centered in whatever the prayer for whatever's happening is industrialization, and the assembly line nature, the homogenizing nature of industrialization, and I think it's an energy. It's not personal, like you said, it's in all these places, and it comes into people in certain moments and certain things they'll say, and you're like, oh, that's that energy. Okay, that's here today, And I think that the way you transmute any kind of resistance, in this case, the resistance that the energy of industrialization has, is, to form, for me at least, a kind of anecdotal reorientation of whatever I'm doing, which often means preying on what the ritual is to confront it. And I think that the hardest thing with orienting towards ritual is how to bring it to bear in difficult moments. I always use the example of like a naming ceremony or a baby shower kind of thing is always real good, easy to do a ritual at, but like when you in a fight with your partner, it's real hard to like bring the water out and do some sort of ritual, because then it's like couples therapy is amazing. Everybody should go to it. But also, you gotta do some rituals too. You know what I mean? To transmute energy, using the elements. And that's always the most difficult place to bring it to bear. So like when we having a hard time with the HBOs of the world or any given institution, and I'm talking with the folks we doing it with, and I'm like, hey guys, I know we talk about strategies to fix this and that, but how about we do a ritual? You know what I mean? It's like, you gotta just move through the side eyes and just do it. You know what I mean? And I feel as much as anybody else, but I think it is always that. Like, and then that's open-ended, because whatever the ritual is always highly specific and it's not repeatable,
Good evening. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Terence, first of all, incredible exhibit. I enjoyed every moment of it. Can you talk a little bit more about fourth dimension trigger, fifth dimension trauma?
Yes.
There's a wonderful essay in the catalog all about it.
You a real one. That's good. You gotta be around people who have a lot of different skill sets. That one right there, you gotta have that, I don't have that one. That's fourth dimension trigger, fifth dimension trauma is a ritual that understands the fourth dimension is time, going forward and backward, both in your lifetime and your descendants' lifetime and your ancestors' lifetime. And the fifth dimension being parallel timelines. And the transportation device between the fourth dimension and the fifth dimension is activation triggers, mostly that are in some way, traumatic and or transcendent. And understanding that a lot of the triggers and traumas that portal us into moments in our childhood, moments in our past lives, moments in our lives yet to be lived, or into alternative moments or realities, a lot of those moments are inhabitations, or moments in which we're being inhabited by our ancestors. Something they experienced comes to bear, or other entities, industrialization as an entity that comes and talks for us for a moment, and I understand that inhabitation, that dynamic of being inhabited and or inhabiting any of those energies as puppetry. And the ritual uses puppetry to symbolize and act out those moments to facilitate that the travel of your, we call it Ifa, your Ori, your head, across different parallel timelines and in your own timeline, so that you can hopefully, when you're triggered, have some level of agency, some level of control.
Wow. Can we get a round of applause for Terence and Maori?